like they probably want to do public comment, but if so, speak now or forever hold your peace. All right, I don't see any. So now we're going to go to a little zoning discussion. I asked the planning committee to just provide us with what they did, the planning commission, but also just some information on the DTC and the DRC, since that's really specific to downtown and this would be an expansion of it. And so I am going to let planning take it away. I think you should be on.
Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, great. So I'm going to start out giving a quick overview of the downtown code and the design review committee and various processes associated with both of those things. Since, as mentioned, they are not as frequently talked about at this body. So just as a bit of history, the downtown code was first adopted in 2010. It differs from the rest of our zoning ordinance in that it is a form-based code. And what that means is that it emphasizes the building form, where a building sits on a lot, or the height, the massing, step backs, and the relationship of the building to the public realm. And so how a building interacts with sidewalks and the streets and all of those sorts of elements. The land uses, as allowed by the downtown code, are organized into five use areas. And so there are 5 areas that break down which uses are permitted throughout the downtown code. The downtown code is organized by subdistricts. There are, I think, 16 subdistricts right now. And there's 3 categories of standards, essentially. There's the sub-district standards, which are specific to those areas and ensure that the development within those areas fits within specific neighborhood context. The sub-districts are outlined on the image on the screen there. There are additionally general standards, and those standards are, they regulate elements that occur throughout the entire DTC. So things like street character, building materials, parking garages, they are not specific to one area of the downtown code, but they are general, they have general applicability across the entire code. And then the third element is signage standards. The proposal that is currently working its way through Metro Council and which has already received a recommendation from the Metro Planning Commission is a proposal to create a new subdistrict called the East Bend Subdistrict. And that is indicated in the area in orange, circled with the red circle there. So this will be the second subdistrict that has been created in the East Bank. The first subdistrict was called the East Bank Subdistrict. And so this is the second subdistrict proposed for the East Bank area. To talk just a little bit about the structure of the downtown code and how projects are reviewed through the downtown code, there's a special body associated with the downtown code called the Design Review Committee. That is a body that is established by the downtown code and is made up of 8 members. It's administered by the Metro Planning staff. And the Downtown Code Design Review Committee reviews new development projects within the Downtown Code, and they use adopted design guidance when they're making those decisions. The DTC, DRC, lots of acronyms, those are members that are appointed or nominated by, and this is specifically outlined in the code, the mayor, the vice mayor, the planning commission, historic commission, downtown partnership, civic design center, urban residents association, and the chamber of commerce. Except for nominees that are made by the downtown partnership or the chamber of commerce, the members must have a design background. And so we're talking about architecture, landscape architecture, those sorts of design elements that we would be looking for in membership. The Downtown Code DRC holds regular public meetings, and those are synced with the Metro Planning Commission calendar from a meeting standpoint. The process for the DTC, and this is a little bit different than the way that some of our other zonings work, is that first of all, there's a pre-application meeting with Metro Planning staff. That is not unique to the DTC. We try to encourage folks, if they're applying for a specific plan or whatever else it may be, to come in for a pre-application meeting so that we can talk through what the standards and expectations are for those projects. A concept plan application and review is required for DTC projects. Those are approved by the DTC DRC at a public meeting. Any major or minor modifications should be filed concurrently so that they can be considered at the same time of the concept plan. The next step would then be a final site plan application, and this is a staff review. Essentially, this is then reviewed for consistency with the committee-approved design. So the Downtown Code DRC is making those decisions around the design of a project, and then they come in for a final site plan, which is the really detailed drawings, and staff reviews those for consistency with that committee-approved design. And then the last step would be building permit review, and that is a staff level review as well. It is not uncommon for DTC projects to have several building permits that are associated with them, and we do review all of those. Do you want me to pause for questions or keep rolling?
I mean, if there are only 3 folks here, if they want to like raise their hand and interrupt you, I think that we can go fairly informally, but we can do questions at the end as well. Yes, Councilmember Cap.
Just a point of order, if you can do that in a no quorum meeting.
Sure.
Public comment is number 2 on the agenda, and there are some members of the public, so I just don't want to forget about them.
Oh, we did announce it at the beginning. Nobody signed up, and I gave them a chance to jump up, and nobody jumped up.
Got it. Okay, I missed that. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so for the second part of the presentation, I'm going to walk through the proposed East Bend subdistrict, which, as I mentioned, is the new subdistrict that's proposed for this, proposed to be created. So the current application is to amend the zoning code to establish the East Bend subdistrict within the downtown code and to establish the development standards and permitted uses. Again, just for your reference, the parcels that this would apply to are outlined on the screen. So just as a bit of background, I think everyone is sort of aware of this process, but the current industrial land use that exists on the property is not compatible with the Imagine East Bank vision and the policy vision for a vibrant mixed-use urban neighborhood. It prioritizes connectivity and public access to the river. And so the existing land uses and their configuration are not compatible with that vision. So the current application is to bring this area into compliance with the Imagine East Bank plan. The Planning Commission has reviewed and made a recommendation on the East Bend subdistrict. And on the screen in front of you is the East Bend regulating plan. What you'll see outlined here are areas of the East Bend subdistrict, the East Bend core, and then other areas, and it shows and indicates the maximum heights that are permitted within those various areas. You will also note that there is public river access, riverfront greenways, a linear park, and a pedestrian promenade that are noted within the regulatory plan. There is a predefined public realm plan that is included within the East Bank subdistrict. And what this does is it indicates various public access elements, including a linear park, the greenway, again, as I mentioned, and then additionally some riverfront POPs. And what that means is privately owned public space. And so the larger of the 2 sites that you see along a river is required to set aside a certain percentage of that site for publicly accessible open space. That's in addition to the greenway easement area. There are entitlements, the urban design and entitlements are outlined again on this site. And there's one thing that I did want to point out here, and that's the River Gateway site. This River Gateway site is the site that sits in the nook of the river and KVB, and that we have identified and that the Planning Commission adopted as sort of a special treatment site. And what the Planning Commission asked the planning staff to do, and has been done now at this time, is to create a supplemental policy for river gateway sites. And so we have done that, and I'll walk through what that means as well. Just to talk a little bit about what the standards are for the East Bend subdistrict in addition to height, we looked a lot at towers and the orientation of the towers and the maximum tower floor plates. So there's the maximum tower floor plate of 18,000 square feet. Up to 3 office towers with up to 26,000 square feet are permitted. We also looked at the orientation of towers as it relates to I-24 and the river. What we don't want to create are walls in either places where you have just building walls along both that would block views or limit the porosity of the site. And so towers that are adjacent to I-24 are required to be at least 35 degrees off parallel to the interstate. And then towers on property between Davidson and the river are required to be generally perpendicular to the river. And so that way you're maximizing public access as opposed to private views of the river. We also looked at and scaled the podium heights that are permitted for buildings. We have facade delineation requirements and some allowances for stoops and frontage and porch frontages.
Can I jump in and ask a quick question?
Yes.
Can you just explain what a facade, where is that, on that last slide? Facade delineation requirements are?
Sure. So there are a lot of different ways to think about this, but essentially once a facade gets to be a certain length, we will ask that there be something that breaks up that facade so that it can minimize the length as it's felt by a pedestrian. So in other words, we would want to have some sort of break in the facade or a building material change or a recess of the building. We also have maximum facade lengths that have been established within this subdistrict so that we can prevent overly long facades.
Okay, thanks.
So I want to talk just for a moment about the River Gateway Supplemental Policy. So the Planning Commission has, as I mentioned, already adopted the River Gateway Supplemental Policy with additional design guidance. And this is for riverfront properties that sit at bridges, corridors, and arterials. This is a policy that is applicable to the entire downtown code. It is not just within East Bend, but there is an application of the policy within the East Bend area. It's applicable to the site noted in pink as the river and pointed out there as the River Gateway site. So what this policy does is it basically says that if you meet certain criteria as reviewed and determined by the Downtown Code DRC, you are eligible for additional height. Something that is common sort of throughout the downtown code are a couple of different programs, bonus height program and overall height modifications. Neither of those are available within the East Bend subdistrict. So there is no bonus height. The heights that you see are sort of the maximum. There's not an overall height modification. But there is this one site where there is a policy that has been created that would allow for some additional height, up to 40 stories. But you have to meet additional policies for excellence in architecture and site design in order to be able to have that additional height. I keep trying to change the slides on my computer and that doesn't work. So there we go. So this is a supplemental policy that has been adopted and, as I said, is applicable to the entire downtown code. It guides how proposals should consider significant street frontages, the river, the ground plane, viaducts and access, and the public realm through site design, height, orientation, massing, et cetera. What this policy calls for is projects to enhance the city fabric by responding to its orientation to the downtown skyline, visibility from the pedestrian bridge, topographical context, and historic industrial or cultural context. It's got to advance policy goals to reorient downtown towards the river, improve public accessibility and connectivity. And then also it addresses high visibility locations by activating all of the public street frontages, all of the public frontages, looking at facade hierarchy in relation to the rivers and corridors, and providing publicly accessible connectivity from viaducts or bridges to the ground plane. The land use the land uses for East Bend are proposed to be the same as those that currently exist for the East use area. So as I mentioned before, there are 5 existing use areas. There was a use area created with the first subdistrict on this side of the river for the East Bank subdistrict. There was a use area created, and we're proposing for East Bend to be within that same use area. In regards to next steps, as I mentioned, the Planning Commission has made a recommendation on the East Bend subdistrict and has already, and so it's now here at the council level. Next steps for planning are to kick off for a major and collector street plan amendment that would involve NDOT, WEGO, property owners, and stakeholders. This will be a Metro-led process. The major and collector street plan guides public and private investment in the major streets, implements Vision Zero, determines alignment in street sections, and preliminary feasibility work has been completed, but we are working to kick off that process and are working internally to set up what that process will look like. That is the end of my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions that you all may have.
Who wants to go first? Councilmember Benedict.
There was a spot there it was going to go in. Thank you. So many questions. Thank you for the great presentation. I love that it says Shelby's Bend up there. I was actually looking at the Vision East Bank plan, and it says Shelby's Bend. And Dr. John Shelby was a big part of East Nashville and just Nashville in general. So I do like, the East Bend name, but I love the history of Shelby's Bend there. Anyway, so cool that slide happens to be paused there while I'm asking questions. I was curious on the River Gateway site. I'm curious, how high is KVB at that site? How many equivalent of stories?
It is roughly it's roughly the equivalent of about 4 stories.
Okay, so if something were 24 stories, it'd be 20 stories above that level, and potentially with the right design guidelines, as many as 36 more stories above that, right?
Generally, the height is measured at the, is it measured at the?
I'm going average. If it's 4 stories and they're allowed 40, then it would be 36 additional. I'm rough numbers
roughly,
here. Yep.
yes.
Okay, want to make sure I understood that. Are there, so the River Gateway site, when was that done by the Planning Commission, and are there other sites on the river?
So it's a floating policy. Essentially, it's not.
Pardon the pun.
Right. Yes. Sorry. That's funny. It's a floating policy. It's not applied to any specific properties, but any properties that feature certain characteristics could come and say, we would like to be considered for the River Gateway policy. And the reason that we did it that way is that there are areas that are within the downtown neighborhood plan that aren't zoned DTC, but could come in for maybe an SP and might say, our policy says we're at this height, but we would like to be considered for additional height because we have these characteristics. And so we set it up not to be applied to any particular properties, but for it to be applied to properties with certain characteristics.
Okay. And so I'm thinking like a River North, if somebody wanted to come back in, and even though that zoning's done, right, for the Oracle campus in that area, they could potentially come in and rezone and look for something like this there? Or it would have to be DTC in that location for that to happen?
It does not have to be zone DTC to apply the River Gateway, but it does have to have certain characteristics like be at a bridge or a viaduct, or there's certain
their new
characteristics.
bridge.
It's more limited,
Okay.
right? And also, I mean, River North just went through an amendment to establish some standards. They also already have heights that exceed this in a lot of cases, so.
Okay. And I just am, I mean, I'm not looking at a map or
Yeah.
zoning or parcel view or any of that. I'm just kind of thinking. I know that on the, can we go to the map with the stories on it? On that, the great, where it says pedestrian promenade, that what's directly underneath that is is Metro land, right? It's a parking lot, I think, today. And that's set to be affordable housing right there, if I recall, that we're required Fallon to build. Is that, do I have that correct? It looks like
No.
the table over there is saying no. Trying to figure out where that one is. You know the affordable piece? I don't know the lot number that it's called on that plan.
Just for the record, everybody at the planning department is sort of pointing up. I don't know if you can see them on M&N. Would one of y'all like a microphone over there?
This won't let me.
I can do it, yeah. Yeah.
Sure. So if you see the call out where it says pedestrian promenade, that white box.
Yep.
Parcel G is right underneath that white box in gray, and that is where Fallon is building.
Yeah, that's what I
the
was trying to
affordable
say.
housing.
That's what I was trying to say, is that gray part underneath where it says pedestrian promenade, that's an affordable development. How many stories is that development?
I think it's 8.
8 stories there, okay. And then I guess just, I want to make sure this stays residential. You know, like we have a need for housing in this city and we want housing density. And, you know, are there uses that are allowed here that are other than just residential? I know we talked about some, I think, mixed use, little retail, office was one of these where some office towers are allowed. But are there other like downtown uses available? Like could a honky tonk open up here?
So this area has the same use standards and restrictions as the current East Bank area, which is also a lot of times referred to as the IDA, the initial development area. So this shares the same uses that are allowed on that IDA, the Fallon property. The uses are the same. There are some restrictions on both because they are all within the East use area around bars. There's a limitation on some square footages around bars. But the uses that are permitted, I mean, it's a pretty long list. It's about 3 or 4 pages long of uses that are permitted. But that's because uses in our zoning code get really specific. Things like hair salon or yoga studio or personal care, it's very specific. And so when you say something like retail, there might be a bunch of different uses
I know
that sort
Animal
of fall.
Hospital was kind of one of the ones that's.
There might be a bunch of different uses that fall within those.
Can we get a
But the
copy of that?
uses are the same. And let me see if I can just pull up that. So here's the use areas. And so you can see that there's northwest, central, and south, and then east. And so the East Bend is proposed to be in the same use area as the current East Bank subdistrict.
Got
So
it.
the uses, all of the uses that are permitted are the same within both of those sub-districts.
Do we have a copy of that? Is that readily available? You said it's
I
like
can
4
get you
pages.
one.
Yeah, if you could get it to,
It's, it's in the DTC right now, but I can get you one.
yeah, if you could get it to staff attorney. On the affordability, the last question I've got, we have the new, the affordability bonus program. I know we don't have any programs in place yet, but that tool is available to us. Is there anything in this that, could require affordability in exchange for some bonuses? on any one of the buildings? And how specific does it get to these buildings?
So right now, I think what you're referring to, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the voluntary attainable housing incentives. Okay, so we have enabled that now for the RL residential limited zoning that you all recently adopted. We are working through, and that took a lot of work to get to the correct calibration, because we look at it, we actually had someone with a market specialty to look at that, to analyze what is the correct calibration for how much bonus you have to give for there to actually be the potential to provide housing. Because there's got to be sort of a break-even analysis anytime it's voluntary. We are working through analysis for other zoning districts across the county, including some of our mixed-use districts and downtown, but those calibrations just have not been completed yet, because they have to be so specific as to what entitlements are already provided and where the bonuses are.
If a property owner came to you and said, I want to make, of this 30-story building, I want to make 2 floors of it affordable, what kind of a bonus will you give me? Would that be something the department could entertain?
Not until we have to come back to you all for you all to adopt anything that sets up the program for voluntary attainable housing for districts, for each zoning district, for that that's how the state law sort of sets it up. So you all will have to enable it. And that's only been done right now for RL.
So any affordability would be a function of whatever the developer wants to do.
I mean, there are other programs through Metro Housing, Barnes Fund. I mean, there's other programs that they could tap into that aren't part of that voluntary attainable housing or the incentive program. But so there's still opportunity to have those conversations just around our existing affordability programs.
Cool. Chair, that's it for now. I know that was a bunch.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. All right, Councilmember Parker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Milligan, for being here, and the planning staff as well, and our staff. Thank you for being here. You know, kind of one of my big picture questions about this process about implementing DTC. You know, as far as I know, everywhere that we've expanded DTC has had infrastructure in place, maybe not ideal infrastructure, maybe not infrastructure that could support the maximum entitlements as is, but there was a street grid of some sort. There's you know, something to start with. And so I'm trying to think through, how does it work, you know, if somebody says, well, I want to build something over here, and we just want to load off and on an existing street adjacent to the parcel. We don't want to contribute to all that. We bought this parcel from the main ownership group. We don't, you know, we're not part of all those other streets and parks and stuff. And they go in and pull a building permit. I mean, what do we do? Like, how do we say that, no, you have to be part of this big project with building this infrastructure?
So they wouldn't be able to just pull a building permit without going through the process that I outlined. So they would have, if they're in this area and they're zoned DTC, they would have to come to the planning department. They would have to apply for and receive approval of a concept plan through the DTC DRC. And then they would have to go through final site plan approval as well. During that process, we would be requiring any sort of necessary studies, including multimodal transportation analysis. Those are generally required per project to look at what infrastructure is required and needed. And so there wouldn't be the ability to just go and get a building permit without that appropriate review.
I understand. I mean, and just kind of being cognizant of the constant threats and reality of litigation and preemption in this space, I'm just wary of, you know, granting these sort of tremendous entitlements without A, the MCSP in place, but B, like, for a site this large where some of these pieces are going to be, I mean, hundreds, it's all across. I mean, I haven't seen anybody add up what's projected with the, conceptual street grid and the parks and everything. But I mean, it looks like hundreds of millions of dollars to me, counting all the horizontal, all the utility work. I mean, so, what I'm worried about is a context where, we're approving maximal density for this area. And then, it shifts to an effort to minimize infrastructure costs for the investors. And who's going to build all this stuff? I mean, it's a tremendous amount of stuff that needs to be built. And then again, if people, like where I grew up, there's a mile-long gravel road. There was like 3 houses there when I was growing up there, and now there's like 12. It's happening everywhere. But there's no HOA. The road is not maintained by the county. So every 15, 20 years, there's like this nightmarish, like tooth-pulling thing where everybody has to come to some agreement about how to, shore up the mile-long gravel road. And people say, well, I live right at the front of the road. I only use this much of it. And well, not as many people drive up here at the top where I am, so I shouldn't have to pay for as much as everybody else. And it's very, very difficult to get 12 people who all moved up there because they have their own personality quirks generally. Anyway, what I'm saying is that I worry about in this situation, again, that context, if somebody purchases that parcel that's right off Davidson, and they say, look, we can load right here. There's already a bike lane right here. Like, we got our multimodal, we got our access. We don't want to have to pay in all that $200 million worth of stuff. How do we manage that?
I mean, each project would be reviewed based on what is proposed to be within the project, what its individual impact is, but would also be required to contribute. So if a project is on an existing road, but there's a new road that's indicated to run beside it, then they'll be responsible for building that road, and we would review all of that with the final site plans. And so that's how we manage it in other ways throughout downtown, is it's reviewed with the final site plans, and there is always, of course, a review of the impact and making sure that we're sort of on solid legal ground. But, if you think about this, somebody's not going to be able to sort of jump over and pick a site in the middle and say, that's the site I'm going to do, and I'm going to build that without any infrastructure, because we're going to say, no, that site is not ready yet until the street is built that gets to that site. And so there's always a timing issue. There's always sort of a readiness question that we can review during the final site plan.
Thanks. Yeah, I continue to be very wary of how that process is going to go. And I there's a little more clarity, like with, when we did a more or less a SP, like with a site plan for like the truck stop property that said there's going to be this road here and that road there. And also I have the MCSP process, like there's going to be a period where these entitlements are approved, but that MCSP is not in place. So what are we measuring applications against in that time, whether that's 6 months or 18 months? What are we measuring? If there's nothing to point to say, well, this plan says you have to build this, can we ask them to wait for plans to be approved to tell them what they're required to build?
Yeah, I think the Planning Commission has outlined that the next process is to adopt the MCSP. And so, yes, I think that we would say, no, you have to wait until the MCSP is completed. And we don't anticipate that that's to be a long-term, sort of a long-term item that's dangling out there and incomplete. We are actively working to outline the process to set up the timing to get that started, to sort of close that loop. And so we don't anticipate that that's going to be something that's hanging out for too much longer. So, but yes, we would certainly say we aren't ready to take an application yet until this is done.
Is there anything in the proposed DTC amendment that says, basically these are not buildable until the MCSP is in place?
I don't know that that's right. I don't know that that's necessarily a condition that's within the document. And the plan that is within, here we go. So the the document that's within the DTC sets out the urban design. And so it sets out this framework of sort of location of streets and alleys. It just doesn't outline what is within the cross sections. And so that's sort of the MCSP piece of it, but it does give a framework for where things are located. And so this is the starting point, and then the MCSP would get the sections correct. And so this is, the subdistrict itself already does set up sort of a block and street structure.
So like presumably the next step for the ownership group would be to parcel this out. Is that right?
That would be up to them. That's not necessarily sort of part of our process. I mean, if they come in with a final site plan, if they come in with a subdivision plat, then we would review it. But if they want to sort of parcel it out, they can. They can do that a couple of different ways. If it's subdivided, then we would certainly be a part of the review.
Okay, thank you. That's it for now. I'll keep listening. I might have some more questions. Thank you.
Okay.
Councilmember Cap, it is your turn. Also, and I should have said this first, just so everybody knows, the applicant is also going to do a short presentation. So to the extent that there are questions that the applicant might be able to answer, just keep that in mind. Sorry, apologies for that. Councilmember Cap.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for being here and working to get this presentation ready. And I have a couple different questions. One is about the the site with the potential bonus height by the bridge. You refer to it, and I've seen it in the document, a standard of architectural excellence as determined by the DRC.
Correct.
So I believe that's the only language that's in place to describe that, or could you speak a little bit to what
Sure.
that means or how you expect it to be reviewed?
Sure, it was kind of long, and so I didn't include that exact language. If you can give me a second, I can pull up the staff report and actually just provide you with that language. So there's a couple of different documents that hold on just a second, I can't
Sure.
hold on.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Let me just open it up and then I can tell you exactly what it says. When did that go? Okay. So is that when the gate? Okay, so the DTC DRC has an adopted document right now that is called the DTC like design guidelines, and that gives some guidance to them around how they are reviewing for the type of elements that aren't necessarily regulatory, like height, the things that get into the flavor of what a building might look like. And so the River Gateway site would add to that. And the language that is in it, sorry, hold on, that's the wrong date. I looked at this earlier. Okay, so the language that's in the River Gateway policy is this. So it gives standards around site design and context. It gives standards around building design, and then it gives general standards. And so what it essentially says around site design is the proposal should enhance the fabric of the city by acknowledging and responding to the following conditions. the site's placement orientation in relation to the downtown skyline, the visibility from significant locations such as from the opposite side of the river or from the pedestrian bridge, the topographical context such as its location on a bluff, bend, or bottom in relation to the river or providing solutions for riverbank stabilization, historic and cultural context of the site, such as the history of the industrial uses on the east bank or historically designated properties. It should advance the following policy objectives: to reorient downtown towards the river by promoting greater activation and porosity to the river, link the east and west sides of the river, improve connectivity and public accessibility, enhance the visibility of the river for pedestrians in the public realm, with pedestrian corridors, view corridors, and landmarks linking neighborhoods to the river, bolster flood resiliency and stormwater management, and support a robust, publicly accessible outdoor space network. For building design, it says, a fitting architectural response will respect the significance, placement, and visibility of river gateway sites within the downtown community plan and achieve the following: elevate design quality along the riverfront with exemplary architectural design composed of high-quality, resilient materials, complement and context through massing, orientation, articulation, geometry, and materiality. This includes the following: size and orient tower massings to respond to the site's specific riverfront location and viaduct adjacencies. Articulate the facade through considered proportions, material treatment, and fenestration. Design base buildings or podiums to integrate with adjacent viaducts, and effectively screen parking from the public realm without sacrificing building activation or architectural integrity.
Thank you. And that's the definition of the floating policy for this potential bonus. Is that right?
Those are, so the way that supplemental policy works, so we have base policies like, for instance, I think T6 neighborhood is a policy, and we have base policies, and that policy will give some general standards for how buildings should be located or the height and what's appropriate. Supplemental policies sit on top of that, and they give more detailed guidance. And so what I just read is the detailed guidance for river gateway sites.
Right. So that could apply to any potential site that was designated as a river gateway
Correct.
site. So I think I appreciate that, and I think that's great. And I hope it would apply as a general matter to all of these constructions, that they're sensitive to their site and use resilient materials and so forth. I think my question concerns the word excellent. And I think what I'm contemplating here is, anything that is built at that site should meet all of the definitions and sort of specs that you just gave. And I appreciate the planning department's, sort of putting all that in. But whether it's entitled to the height bonus comes down to whether it's architecturally excellent or not, which is a separate matter from all those requirements, I hope. So I think what I'm envisioning is, or I guess my understanding of the idea is that a building is entitled, or not entitled, but could be eligible for a height bonus if it's architecturally excellent, not if it meets all of those requirements, which should be for whatever gets built there. Excellence as defined by the DRC.
As defined, right. This is the guidance for determining excellence that I just read.
Okay, so those are not requirements for just anything that gets built there.
There are requirements for anything that gets built there in regards to minimum building material standards, height, glazing percentages, activation. There are standards, and everything has to go through the Downtown Code DRC. But there are elevated standards for this site.
Thank you. And so, I think the idea here is, we're at least hoping to promote the idea of a dignified, beautiful, site-specific, Nashville-specific building at a prominent site. And so I appreciate all that, and that's the basis of my question. So thank you for walking us through that. I have another sort of more general question about everything. And this will be very general at first, but I just want to make sure for anybody watching has a general understanding of how the land use regulations work here. Planning has defined floor plate sizes such that, correct me if I'm wrong, three of these buildings, three potential buildings could be for office use, and the rest are essentially have the floor plates to make them work for residential or hotel. Is that right?
Generally, yes.
Was there something key that I was missing
No.
there? Okay.
There are larger floor plates that are usually associated with offices. That would be up to 3, that could be up to 26,000 square feet.
And
Right.
the reason for limiting the rest of the floor plates is to encourage them to be non-office use. I mean, they'd be mixed use on the ground floor, but, you know, in their towers to be residential or hotel. Is that, I just want to make sure that that's a right understanding.
Yes, I mean, there's reasons that you would limit floor plates as well from just a tower spacing and orientation or porosity standpoint. So that's another reason to sort of limit floor plates.
But those smaller floor plates really wouldn't work for office uses.
Generally, they don't because of the needs that office looks for. It's typically a larger floor plate for offices.
So this is a concern I've raised in other meetings, but I'd love it if you could help us think through how to achieve the goal. Certainly hotels exist in great neighborhoods, but I'm not aware of any truly great neighborhoods that are mostly hotels. So under the sort of current floor plate regulations, potentially most of this could be hotels. And there's certainly a great, at least intuitive economic rationale to build hotels here. It's close to a lot of amenities, it's close to downtown and so forth. So I'm interested in limiting hotel uses, not eliminate them, but to try to achieve an overall district that is mostly housing, a neighborhood with, you know, residents mostly. And so I know there's a couple different ways we could think about achieving that, either by a square footage basis or a number of keys. Could you walk through some of the potential ways that we could think about achieving that goal, and maybe what thoughts you have about how to achieve it?
Sure. So I think from a use standpoint, there are currently a couple of different places in the downtown code where uses have been sort of further articulated from just the use table. And I'm going to talk about each one of those because each one represents sort of a different way to think about how you narrow it down. So the first is the downtown code was amended to prohibit surface parking or parking as sort of a standalone use in the area that is covered by the 2nd Avenue Preservation District. And so that was a situation where that entire use area does permit parking, but it was restricted down and said, but not here. And so that is a geographic limitation. It's defined by an area, if you will. The second way that we have sort of articulated uses in a way that's more narrow than what's permitted broadly by the use area is within the East Use District, where bars have been restricted by square footage. And so that's another way to sort of think about how to articulate or how to narrow down a use. So square footage, geographic area. For hotels, I think sort of the third that comes to mind, as you mentioned, is limiting the number of keys. So that would be the number of rooms. I think from a regulatory standpoint, I think that key and that regulation is likely a little bit difficult from an enforceability standpoint. And we always try to think about enforceability anytime that we're looking at a regulatory standard, right? It's the law. We want to make sure that it's enforceable. And so I think that one is kind of difficult from that standpoint. And so that sort of leaves square footage and area. I think that when you're thinking about sort of creating a new neighborhood, you might want to think about it from a geographic standpoint in regards to street hierarchy, potentially. just as a way to think about it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Chair, that's all I've got for the moment.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Benedict, you had a follow-up?
Thank you. So actually, thank you, because a couple things got me thinking. I was looking at the Imagine East Bank Vision Plan and the executive summary of it. One of the things it talks about, and you brought up parking just a second ago, which made me think, oh yeah, parking. And so I looked in that just to see, and it says develop a parking operational plan that aligns with the mobility strategy. And then the other part of that plan, as we look at creating that neighborhood, is place multimodal transportation at the forefront. I want to understand how, this does that. And I also want to think about the connection to Murfreesboro Pike that was a part of East Bank Boulevard before, and what a relief that would be to the pressure of the traffic in this area. And so if there's the potential along, thinking about like an SP zoning and what we can get, right? So is there a way for something like that to be included as a, and I mean, even pedestrian, right? But some sort of a bridge for that, traffic, I guess, and kind of going backwards, looking at like traffic, what the plan is there, what the multimodal, I think buses came up in a conversation somewhere, maybe last time around. We talked about, what's the WeGo strategy, and we can't know that till we know the street infrastructure, et cetera. But I think just generally thinking about, could this all be parking? Could somebody just say, well, this is all parking when we get to those uses? And, what's the plan for cars? Are we designing a neighborhood to be as car-free as possible? So kind of, what are we doing? I guess, does this cover any of that?
So that's a lot of questions. Let me try to see if I can unpack it. From a modal hierarchy standpoint, we're obviously prioritizing pedestrian bikes above single occupancy cars. Some of the ways that we've done that is to look at access management and consolidation. Where do cars get access? The downtown code, since its adoption, has not required parking, but often market demands lead to the inclusion of parking within buildings. There's been sort of a evolution of the thinking around parking and garages and how we can limit that impact. There are requirements within this sub-district for active liners to be located on parking garages. And so what that does is you're acknowledging that there is probably a market demand for some parking, but designing it in a way that it can have active uses. And so it's not creating sort of a void of activity along those streets where the parking podiums are located. So that's one way. It's designing it in a way so that it's not sort of parking forward. It's got active uses that can allow for that activation. The second thing, like I said, is you'll see some sort of more narrow lines throughout this structure or throughout this plan, and those are sort of thinking about back of house, loading, access, consolidation, so that you can minimize conflicts for pedestrians and bicycles along the streets, so that you can minimize drives, you can minimize those cuts, and you can just get rid of some of those conflicts, right? So that's critical, and that is built into this sub-district. Prioritizing bikes and prioritizing people and bikes, pedestrians and bikes. I can't speak to that just now. I don't have enough background on that or the status of where it
I should have
is.
said it on the mic, the bridge.
Sorry. Yeah, the question about the bridge, I don't have enough background on that, but I feel like that has been removed from the major inclusion. I just need to check, so I don't want to speak to that.
I believe it was removed, and I'm curious, that's certainly, detrimental to the neighborhood across 24, right? And Murfreesboro Pike, people coming up Murfreesboro or going out Murfreesboro, right, from this area and from downtown in general. I think there's, a real opportunity to relieve some pressure on traffic if we are going to have cars here. You know, kind of like how can we look at a finite number of hotel rooms? How can we work backwards to a finite number of cars? Obviously, we can't dictate whether I have a car or you do, you know?
Buses. You talked about that. Sorry. The all-access corridor for East Bank terminates and goes on Korean Veterans Boulevard, and so this area would likely be a local service as opposed to the extension of an all-access corridor. But WeGo and NDOT would both be heavily involved in the Major and Collector Street Plan update.
I guess the last question I have is, and Councilmember Parker was talking about this a little bit. I think again, going back to that Imagine East Bank vision plan, contemplated the infrastructure to be put in place before like permits being pulled, things like that. I thought that and I could be remembering wrong, but I thought that it called for infrastructure, and I don't mean to mischaracterize what Councilmember Parker said, but as that discussion was happening, that's what I was thinking.
I would need to review it, but I don't think that the Imagine East Bank infrastructure is typically going to be an iterative process that takes place over time based on which areas are developing. So I don't think we would expect that all of it would be on the ground before or in advance of any construction. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, and I don't think that that's what
Thank you. And thank you for all of this. You're so knowledgeable. Appreciate it.
I just have a couple questions. There was some talk about the MCSP, but also the public realm, and the MCSP doesn't govern all of the public realm, and I'm just trying to think about how those work together and when they get adopted. And if you could just explain a little bit more about that public realm piece, and just for background, like I think the Gulch is a place I go through a lot, and it's a part of the DTC, and I think if you look at the earlier developments in the Gulch, the public realm is probably not what any of us would consider ideal. It's very narrow sidewalks. And then, you mentioned this facade definition, it's just big flat buildings, right? And then if you look at more recent buildings in the Gulch, they have step backs and wider sidewalks and public space and art. And so I'm trying to sort of understand how we get to the public realm and how we make sure in the DTC that we're getting to the sort of better version of the public realm and not the kind of pre-version.
I always feel so awkward. Do you want me to?
No, you just look out there, talk to the wind. It's totally fine.
I feel so awkward when I'm answering a question to you because I don't want you to have to stare at the back of my head. But I will say that the Downtown Code and the Design Review Committee and the tools that the Design Review Committee has at its disposal have evolved over the years. We are always looking at and thinking about ways to make those standards better so that we can get the best design possible. And I think that some of what you're reacting to is the improvements that we've made to the standards. A couple of things that the Design Review Committee now has sort of at their disposal, a design, let me flip back here. So there is a document called the Downtown Code Design Guidelines that gets at some of what you're talking about. And then the public realm framework can be more specific around some of the urban design elements that are unique to this area. So the Downtown Code Design Guidelines is something that our design studio staff created. And what this does is it's a companion to the DTC. Zoning in and of itself and the DTC, it can be a little cold. It's all about sort of precision and numbers and this height and this setback, and it doesn't speak to that flavor of a development or, that extra piece that makes a really great design. And so that's what the Downtown Code Design Guidelines can help the DTC, DRC to get to, is that really fine-grained flavor of a development. So that's sort of one piece of it. The public realm framework, and we're we're sort of working through getting that adopted. There was a public realm framework that was adopted by the DTC DRC for the East Bank for the IDA. And what that does is it really speaks specifically to building interaction with open spaces. And so not just the streets, but a little bit more precise around where you have open spaces or greenways and how the buildings interact with those. And so it's just adding layers to the tools that the DTC DRC has. So you've got the code that sort of gives you those numerical measures. You've got the design guidelines that add some flavor for the DTC DRC when they're reviewing things. And then the public realm framework is just a little bit more specific and nuanced for this area. It's still in progress, and we will continue to work through it to get it to the DRC for adoption. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. And and it sounds like it probably won't be done before this is up for third, since y'all are still working through it. It sounds like, but is it like the MCSP where you wouldn't necessarily approve anything before that's done because you wouldn't have the framework with which to do it? I'm just trying to understand how.
I think it can probably run and be completed at the same time concurrently with the MCSP.
Okay. Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I also just think it is a little peninsula, and it's going to be it is hard to get in and out of. Today, it's going to be much harder to get in and out of.
And just as a sort of a point of just as a little bit of a point of reference, we don't have a public realm framework for the Gulch, but all of that good stuff that you've seen in the later iterations have come out of sort of the design guidelines and having modifications, amendments made to the DTC over time.
Okay, that's helpful. And I guess that also, I'm trying to envision too, like, it's really hard because you see 40 stories, and maybe this is really a question for the next presenters. I think of like big boxes, and I think of like Manhattan and like how kind of just like, it just doesn't feel, some people love it, but like most people who live in Nashville would say they choose, to live in Nashville, not Manhattan, as opposed to like a Chicago where the buildings are interesting and they have various facades and like sort of step backs and interesting elements. And I'm just sort of curious on those design guidelines, like how we look at that when we're approving stuff.
Sure. So just those are maximums. The heights that are outlined are maximums. And if you think about Sobro, for instance, as an existing subdistrict that's had a significant amount of development, every site within Sobro is permitted to have a very tall building. But in reality, what we see is not every site having a very tall building. So just because Sobro is actually allowed for unlimited height once you incorporate bonuses. But that's not the reality of what we've seen develop. Some of it is market, some of it is, size of parcels, but you even though every parcel is allowed to have unlimited height, they don't. And so every parcel over here may be allowed to have 20 stories, 30 stories, 40 stories, but I don't know that I would necessarily assume that every parcel would have that height. There is sort of setting the entitlements, and then once you start getting final site plan review, you'll generally see a range of heights. So entitlements, of course, are set, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it's going to end up being developed, and that's not what our experience has been from other sub-districts across the DTC that have even higher entitlements.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. That's all I have. Does anybody have anything else? Councilmember?
I'm curious about acreage compared to the East Bank part, kind of river. Just trying to understand 47 acres. I know what it is, and people all know what it is. When we drive by, we see the scrapyard. We're excited to see something different there. When we think about 47 acres, trying to get my head around that, if I'm, somebody that's not as familiar as what East Nashville is with this, how big is the stadium area, the public land area that we just went through that process? Do you know how many acres that is?
I have a feeling that my colleagues are looking.
Oh, hold on.
The IDA is around 32 stories,
Acres.
32 acres, 32 stories, I'm
So
sorry.
many numbers.
32 acres. The initial development area is around 32 acres. And you can look at this map here, just, each of those different colors sort of represents a sub-district. And so you can look at the orange shaded part is the East Bend sub-district. The IDA sub-district is the golden yellow color one that's sort of adjacent to it. And there's properties that are included within that shading that are actually not proposed to be rezoned at this time. Just for ease of mapping, you draw a little polygon around it. And so the size of it, it's not the biggest sub-district that exists in downtown. It's not the smallest, but it is on the smaller side from the standpoint of the sub-districts.
Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Milligan, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. Yes, you can absolutely move over there. You can do whatever you want at this point. I mean, you could anyway, but I appreciate that you chose to spend this time with us. I think the applicant had a short presentation, which I think will be helpful because, and just sort of speaking this into the record, a lot of times when we have a zoning, it's coming as like an SP, there's a specific plan, we know what's going there, we can see it. This is very different. This is a 47 acres is massive. I believe it is, the gulch is the gulch 20 or 50? I know one of you back there knows the answer to this question over there, but this is gulch. I think it's like 50, right? I think this is roughly the size of the gulch for people at home trying to conceptualize this. So there is. I think it's bigger than 50. Okay, well, not quite as big as the gulch, but close. So I think it would just be helpful for folks to sort of understand the scale of this, but I would just also caution that, it's not like all of this is going up tomorrow. It is a long process. It is, in addition to infrastructure being iterative, I think these plans probably are as well, and the vision. But with that, I will turn it over to you, sir.
Doug Sloan, I appreciate the opportunity to get to present to the committee. We had a public hearing, I should say a community meeting. Oh, thank you. And presented this to them as well. We've actually attended 3 different community meetings, and we're able to present these at least to 2 of those. Third one, we weren't allowed to present anything. And this one actually shows one of the open spaces that we're talking about. This is the promenade that's been shown on the plans now a number of times. It stretches from South 2nd Street down to the center of Davidson. And this is a pedestrian exclusive area that would allow pedestrians, and our thought was a lot of the pedestrians will be entering into our district from East Nashville along right there where KVB and 2nd meet. And so we were trying to find an area that could bring them into the downtown or into the district and down to the river in a safe way. And this is, obviously just a drawing that we have put together that shows what the intent is for this area, what a 50-foot wide promenade looks like that has active storefronts. I do want to take a minute, though, and share and point out something you were just talking about. So I'm former planning director, and before that, I advised all the land development departments in Nashville before I became the planning director, and advised the planning department at the time that the Gulch was being drawn up and considered. And one of the greatest regrets that we had as a city at the time, and still today, is that while we put in the policy of the Gulch to have open spaces and have connections like this, they never materialized. And they didn't materialize really because we didn't put them in the beginning of the plan. We didn't specifically say, and we're going to do it here, and this is how it's going to be done. In contrast to that, that's exactly what the city has done here. The planning department has done here, is identify where are those open spaces going to be, how do they operate, how do they connect, what's the intention behind those open spaces, and require them for future development. So if you buy a piece of property that is along the promenade, or you buy a piece of property that's along the linear park, then you have to participate and develop your portion of that open space. It's required, as opposed to aspirational like it was in the Gulch. And so there's, the city in many ways, and you have pointed out that what you see today in the public realm being built is vastly different than what you would see, 10, 20 years ago. And that's because lessons learned and improved. And so as we began working with the planning department and with the East Bank Development Authority, and CHIME and NDOT and TDOT and TDEC and all the other organizations that have been at the table with us, we go and we were able to talk to them about our intent, what the long-range goal is for this area, and how we can achieve that. And one of the main things, it's come up a couple of times today, is this idea of what's traffic going to look like and their ability to get in and out of here. And if we're being frank, we're not trying to be an area that you drive through. If you look at the way that the streets are designed, if you look at the way that the open space is designed, you'll see it's been intentional. We're not trying to be an area that you drive through. As a matter of fact, to our south is Shelby Hills and Shelby Park. There's an industrial area immediately to the south, but then it's neighborhood. And so we've pared our roads down from the Central District, the East Bank area, and the Boulevard in particular, try to be down, well, it will be down to 2 lanes by the time you get to the final blocks of the district. And that's intentional. It's intentional because it speaks to what we're trying to accomplish in this neighborhood. Another thing is that we use the Imagine East Bank as our compass as we started doing this. And so I'll get into it towards the end, and we've got a couple of images that I want to show you where we prioritize bikes, and we prioritize bike lanes, and we prioritize the pedestrian environment and the open space. But there is nowhere in downtown, or quite frankly, anywhere in this county, where someone has purchased land of this size and then set out to dedicate almost a third of it to open space and to the public realm. But that's exactly what's been done through the process of working with the planning department and all the other departments that I've talked about. This is, as I said, this is an image of the promenade. The promenade has to go where it's shown. It has to be a minimum of 50 feet wide. And it's intended to be able to take that section of the community and whoever's visiting down to the river. And if we can, I guess I can move to the next one, right? This is the Greenway. And I say Greenway, but really what I mean is Riverwalk. I used Greenway because it was a term that was used earlier. We're going to dedicate, and we have to, based on the plans, we have to dedicate 75 feet for the entirety of the Greenway. From the north to the very end to the south, the Greenway has to have 75 feet dedicated. And our intention is to program it with a bike lane and pedestrian environment. I will say that the bike lanes along the river are not the same bike lanes that we intend to have on Davidson and that we intend on having on South 2nd, which are protected bike lanes that are more designed for folks that are trying to use bike lanes as transportation. Certainly you can use this for transportation, but you're intermingled with pedestrians and other people, and having now gotten a good education from BPAC folks and from Walk Bike Nashville, they made it clear, look, there's a distinction between the different types of bikers that are out there. And so the environment that you might build for one could look very different than you would for the other. And so while we've got, you know, bikes shown here and we've got pedestrians and this open space, that these bike lanes will be significantly different than the ones you'll see on Davidson and on South 2nd. These images are, they meet the requirements of the proposed DTC amendment. And again, they're required. These are not optional. You can't build over here and not build this. I'm going to go ahead and get to my other couple of slides before I address some of the questions that came up. So this is the main pedestrian network that deals mostly with our open space, but then also you see that we've got sidewalks throughout every one of our streets. And then we're also using those open spaces as an opportunity for pedestrians to make their way through the district. Not optional. These are required spaces that are already within the DTC. You know, there are some challenges, frankly, that we're still working through, and through the discussions of defining the different roads and the different cross sections in the major and collector street plan, these will become clear. That conversation's ongoing. That conversation's just really starting up where we're all able to sit down at the table and say, okay, now that we have the district, we have the uses, the next thing that we need to do is to be able to figure out how each one of these specific legs of these transit systems, how they work, how they operate. And it is our desire not to only have the East Bank Development Authority and NDOT and Chime at the table, but we have specifically asked that BPAC be at the table during those discussions, that Walk Bike Nashville be at the table during those discussions, that Vision Zero folks be at the table during those discussions, because of what we're trying to create. And no one knows the small little details that you can put into these spaces that make a big difference better than those organizations. And so this is not something we're trying to do, behind closed doors. We want to do it out in the open and have all the different groups that deal with transportation networks sitting there working through it.
Do you mind if I interrupt you real quick before you go to the next slide so you don't have to come back to this one later? One thing we haven't talked about, but I think might just be helpful for anybody watching is there's, I kind of call it like a boot / kind of wonky L down in the bottom. And I think a lot of people sort of imagine a greenway going all the way across the river, but that parcel is actually not what we're talking about now. And we're not looking at doing a rezoning of that because that is a very active industrial site. And so if you could just, before you go on, explain sort of what the connection looks like outside, because I think it's going across KVB, and I know we talked about this some on the IDA and the affordable site and how to make that connection safer. But if you've had any conversations about that or thoughts about that, I think that would just be helpful for people to understand.
Yes, and the majority of that property is owned by Citgo, and they have a representative here today. But they've been great to talk to. They've said, look, come talk to us. We've got an operating business here. We want to make sure that the business is able to operate, and it services a great deal of our city. So it's an important part of how our city functions. But they've been great about saying, look, we'd love to figure out a solution. Let's talk about that. But until we do, we wanted to go ahead and figure out how to get people back over to the Greenway. And so even within the DTC, this amendment, the proposed amendment, it has a required pedestrian environment that runs along the side of the parcel, which is, I say unusual. I don't even know of another one that requires that of a parcel to have it run along a shared property boundary. But it's in the DTC. so that we're able to, if you're enjoying the Greenway and you get to this industrial site, you're able to get around the industrial site and get back down to the Greenway, right? And so we've designed it that way, but again, we're in discussions with the Citgo group, and they really have. They've come to all the meetings, and as I said, Baylor Swindle's here, and she can speak to that as well. But they haven't been presented anything specific to respond to yet.
I appreciate that. I don't want to make them go on the record because they weren't expecting that. I think Councilmember Benedict had a similar question, and she just wanted to go ahead and clarify that as well.
Thank you, Chair. I think just thinking of that spot where Citgo is, do they have a dock? Do they have actual like barge traffic coming from that site or boat traffic coming from that site?
Oh, she left.
I see a shaking of the head, not a nodding.
I will say I don't think so. I don't think I think there are lines underground right there that, where they get their supply from. Most of the energy systems like that get all of their supply from the lines, from the underground pipes.
I couldn't remember exactly where the docks are around this parcel, so
yes.
Thank you, or
now
these parcels.
But then they have to put them on trucks at this location and then get them out to the gas stations, and that's my understanding of what they do at this location.
Sorry to take you off your presentation. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Hopefully you notice I'm just ad-libbing. Then this is the bikeway network that we have today, right? This is at a minimum what we plan to do. And as we have these conversations with the group that I've already talked about, it may change some, but the idea is to have these protected bike lanes areas where you see it in green and in blue, and then the connectors that bring you down within the parcel that's to the east of Davidson down to the river. And then, of course, you'll be able to ride your bike on the Greenway as well, but again, hopefully that's a different cyclist, and you don't have people trying to ride their bikes at 20 miles an hour through the middle of the Greenway, and including former vice mayors, because it's dangerous. So that's the bike network as we have it today. Not a final, hey, here are the cross sections, but one of the other things that I was shot at Greg, high note, subtly. He wrecked on a Greenway once, going too fast. I saw a lot of confusion with that comment. So what we hope is it supplies the transportation network for the bikes to be able, for bikers to get through the district, get to work, wherever they need to go, but also for the casual. My daughter and I and my wife have ridden our bikes from downtown out to Two Rivers, right? And it's harrowing to go through downtown just to get to Davidson. And Davidson's, a relatively protected bike lane, but not a real protected bike lane. But then it gets you to Shelby Park, and then it's absolutely beautiful once you get there. But our goal is to improve that so that the entire experience that you have is enjoyable, and that you don't feel threatened by the cars that are going around you. We're intentionally keeping we plan to, of course, ultimately it's not our choice. Ultimately, it's Metro's choice about how wide how wide the street lanes are. If we had it our way, they'd be about 10 feet because we want to slow cars down. We're happy if there's not an area in here that's more than 25 miles an hour. That we'd be just fine with that because of what we're trying to do, what we want to build. I do want to talk a little bit about the linear park is on this image. It's where you see the green arrow turning towards the river and then meeting the yellow arrow, and then the blue arrow going across it. Just to the right of that, you see that linear park that stretches from up near the interstate all the way down to this central area between Davidson and the river. Along that park, one of the things that we want to do, and that it's written into this section of the DTC, We asked for not to have the minimum height that's required throughout the district at that location, but to allow us to just do single-story buildings there, because what we want to do is we want to have little kiosks, and not kiosks like you see at the mall. But if you've been to Bryant Park in New York or in some other cities, you'll see these things that almost look like little greenhouses. But they're great places for makers and for small businesses. And we think that that could be a really great location to, creating that place where you've got a neighborhood, but you've also got folks coming into the neighborhood to see these small businesses and these maker spaces. And so when you read the DTC and you read that one section, it says, hey, here they can be lower than, I've forgotten what it is, 5 or 8 stories, whatever it is. And it's because of that's what we're trying to accomplish at that location. There also is these two, both the promenade and this linear park come down and hit south of Davidson. And as it really gets right to in the last 200 feet before the river, we've limited our ability to develop property to 60% of that land, meaning that 40% of it has to be, open. Now, what does that look like? Well, that could look like cafes. It could look like a playground. There are a lot of different things depending on how we end up organizing that space, but it has to be open for the public. And the idea here is you can see this open space. You can see the buildings opening up down that direction towards the river, and then eventually connecting to the greenway. And it's to make the community feel like, hey, this is your space. Come on into this space. It's perfectly comfortable for you to get down to the river. And so that was one of the reasons that we limited how much you can develop in that area. I wanted to jump to some of the questions that were brought up earlier. The first one is on infrastructure, and I think your rough estimates are correct. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of infrastructure. We're still working with the Corps and other organizations about how to make this area resilient. And one of the pieces of how to make this area resilient is to elevate it. We're going to have to elevate this area. And that's a lot of dirt. That's a whole lot of dirt. But when we elevate it, the water department's already indicated, well, that means we're also going to have to elevate some of even the existing lines are going to have to be elevated. Because you can't, the further you take that pipe, the more land you're just eating up, and the more difficult it becomes to service. And so there are a lot of these lines that we know that we're going to have to replace. There's actually very little that's probably going to stay in the ground in this area. But hopefully some of you are familiar with the Infrastructure Development District legislation that was passed up at the state. It was passed about 2 years ago, and it was initially designed just for residential, and then it was expanded to include residential and business. And what this legislation is opening up the opportunity for local governments to do is to place assessments on properties that need large-scale infrastructure projects done. So it's about as close as we've ever gotten to be able to do impact fees in Davidson County. And the idea is the property owner looks at the property, talks to the water department, talks to NDOT, talks to NES, understands gas, sewer, water, and understands what the infrastructure needs are for their development. And in this case, it's this entire district, right, that has to be done. Then they put together an application that they would present to the council, ultimately, that says, much like a business improvement district, and it says, we're okay paying an additional amount every year. And if we can have the money that comes from that to pay for the infrastructure that's coming in here. So developer hands over an application. That application says, here's all the infrastructure that we want included in this IDD. Here are all the properties that have agreed to be included in this IDD. and here's how much we agree to pay in additional taxes, not taxes, an additional assessments, not tax, that would then pay a bond that the city issues. The city issues that bond, but the bond is a revenue bond that is tied directly to these, to this assessment. And so when you go out to the bond market and you sell the bond, the purchasers of those bonds understand all these properties have an assessment on them for 20, 30 years that go to pay those bonds off. But it helps, especially in a project of this magnitude, to be able to raise what I suspect will be the lion's share of all of that infrastructure that needs to go in here. And it does it without impacting the taxes at all. The IDD money comes directly from the property owners that are involved in it. So I say that to say, look, that's a big, big piece of the puzzle about how we get the infrastructure built. I don't think it's a silver bullet. I don't think a silver bullet exists out there, but I think that it is, without that tool, I don't know that we'd be having this conversation today. Without the ability to leverage that and be able to get that sort of money up front to build out this infrastructure. I don't know that the East Bank in this area in particular could be done. So the other thing I would say is this, just speaking to the law on when the city can make a developer pay for infrastructure. And there has to be really two major issues that you have to resolve. One, is the infrastructure that the city is asking for be built? Is there a direct connection between that and the development that's being built, right? So if the city comes to a developer and says you have to widen the sewer line or the water line or the road, is that a direct relationship to how you're changing the use of that property? Without a doubt, we're going from industrial to downtown code. Yeah, whatever we build there is going to change the way that all that infrastructure is used. So the city absolutely has the ability to require that the developer contribute towards the infrastructure costs. And then the next thing is it proportionate? So these are the two questions that the courts ask. Is there a direct connection, a nexus between what the city's demanding and how the property owner is affecting it, that infrastructure? And then is it proportionate? And so I go through all that, Councilman, I go through all that to say, no, the city is not going to get caught in the lurch here, because this is not where you're saying in an already built environment where all the infrastructure is there, hey, we want you to contribute, even though you're just doing something internal, we want you to contribute to the sidewalk network, right? Which is the one that kind of bubbled all this up. Here, it's a complete revamp of the infrastructure, and the only reason that infrastructure is being built out is because this development is happening. And so you've got a legal department, but I would tell you that you're on pretty stable ground in this area, because this is pretty black and white on that issue. The other one I know that came up was the public realm and the timing of the public realm and the MCSP. And of course, Lisa's absolutely correct. Those are going to go hand in hand. It's impossible to talk about one without talking about the other. They are two different documents, but they will be done at the same time. It's worth noting that the Central District still hasn't updated the Major and Collector Street Plan, that it still lies out there just as it was beforehand. And so it's not as though that has to be done before you can move forward. But I assure you this, NDOT isn't going to let us start building. Planning's not going to let us start building until those issues have been resolved. So we will have to deal with those, and we're going to move as fast as we can with all those organizations to get the public realm and the sidewalk network, all the different transportation networks that we've already talked about, memorialized, regulated through the Major and Collector Street Plan before we start building anything. I already mentioned a little bit about resiliency. We're spending a lot of time, a lot of effort about grazing this area so that we don't continue to exist. So we don't put money into an area only then to have to use money to recover from floods. And so we're raising the entire area through long conversations with the water department and with planning. We're not putting things underground that are going to flood that we're then going to have to repair. Had we put garages underground, we would have had to install pumps that would have run 24 hours a day, 365 days a year for the life of those buildings. And so we're not doing that. And that's intentional because we're not trying to build something that's not resilient to the world that we live in today. I think that I've tried to go through it. And one last point that Lisa made. Where Fallon is building the affordable housing, it's entitled for 40 stories. If you look at the legislation that came through council that entitled the Central District, the East Bank, the IDEA, that property is entitled for 40 stories. Just because you have entitlements for 40 stories or 30 stories doesn't mean that's the way that works out. The market usually defines what's going to be there. And so while I would tell you, I do hope that there are a lot of tall buildings here. We hear people talk about density is key. Having people live, work, and play so they're not out on the streets driving more cars. That's what we've been trying to achieve as a city for a very long time. And he recently passed away, but Rick Bernhardt, this city owes a lot to that man and his vision about pushing development downtown and trying to preserve our neighborhoods. And I think this is just a great opportunity to further that by putting both a place where you'd want to live, a lot of things you can enjoy, and that you can work in without having to get in a car. So with that, unless you've got questions for me, I will actually shut up.
Thank you. Do any council members have questions that they want to ask? Okay, Councilmember Midget.
Thank you. And thank you for the thorough presentation. Could you come back to the mic because I got questions for you, Doug? And I appreciate you and this. I do have some questions. I'm going to try to be quick. I actually had grabbed a sandwich at a local deli in Inglewood, and I was the owner caught me there, and I was almost late to this meeting because I love talking with him. And he mentioned going through Shelby Park and Davidson Street to get where he goes all the time. And I said, yep, we're about to talk about that. So one of the things that I run into with my constituents is they take Riverside Drive and they go through Shelby Park and then they go through Davidson Street to get where they're going. They used to use Ellington, which was our secret 25 years ago, till TDOT connected it with I-65. So now, if they lose their Davidson Street connection, it becomes something else. That's of concern to them. So when I talk about this stuff, that's where a lot of it's coming from. I think I really like that you talked about, not trying to be a drive-through area. I guess my question, and you mentioned the 2-lane road, you mentioned that, and I love that, but I'm curious, is there anything in the bill that prevents the drive-through area from, eventually being developed? How is that restricted in the bill as it stands today?
Well, and that's just not this bill is not the tool that would accomplish that goal. That's the Major and Collector Street Plan. And frankly, one of the reasons that I really do want BPAC and Walk Bike Nashville and Vision Zero there is that I know the planning department feels a lot like our group does about what this should be like. But oftentimes other organizations that maybe prioritize traffic counts and movements don't. And so, frankly, my idea is to stack the folks who are going to be sitting around that table talking about the Major and Collector Street Plan with the planners at the planning department, with the groups that I just talked about, and along with what our vision is. So that has to happen at the Major and Collector Street Plan for it to have the enforceability that I think you and I would like.
Thank you. And I guess, do any of those groups have any regulatory authority with the DRC? I guess that I'm looking at the planning table.
No.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Councilmember, they do not. I would add that Civic Design Center does, and so there is a group that I saw on the slide who was thinking about that.
Thank you for that. You mentioned that about a third of the property is public, it will be, public, dedicated to public land. Curious how much of that third are streets? And then, that maybe aren't there today, the proposed North Second, for instance. And then the other one I'm curious about of that, how much of that is land that couldn't be built on as it is today? Because I know there was a landing spot there on the open space where it looked like that wasn't buildable or something. There was something there I'm not looking at right now, but of that, I guess when I go to the public and say, hey, they're giving us a third of the land here for public space, they're going to say, well, how much was there that they couldn't use to begin with? Especially because they're also thinking about environmental concerns, but I'm not even going down that road today.
Okay. Well, I want to make sure that there aren't any concerns about the environmental conditions of the property. And we're entering the voluntary oversight program at TDEC. So they'll see everything that we're seeing. We'll hand over all our information. It'll all be public. So let's talk about for the first, one of the questions, Jessica, how much of it's unbuildable already, right? And so there's a significant part, certainly of the greenway along the river, that no one's going to want to build right there. Even as we elevate that space, right? You're not going to want to build something that close to the river, and our setbacks would require that anyway. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't use it for private purpose. That doesn't mean that if you owned a piece of land like that you wouldn't put your restaurant with your dining area right out there, because you could do that. And frankly, still, we will want our buildings down at that area to address the greenway and create destinations for folks that are using the greenway. We do plan on doing it. But to answer your question, those first 75 feet, we would never have gone vertical regardless, right?
A lot of the questions I'm asking you are from questions I'm getting that I want to be able to answer for my folks, right?
Sure.
So, when I think about, when they hear that, they're like, well, where is that third of the land and why wouldn't they develop it, right? So for me to be able to answer those questions, it's important to hear what you're saying.
Well, and that's why I love this opportunity right now, frankly, because it finally gives us a forum where we get to speak and talk about all the things that we're trying to do. So I can send you, I don't know those numbers exactly, but what I will do is I'm going to send you, I don't know that I can get it done today, but tomorrow, I'm going to send you a diagram that shows where those properties are, what properties include these elements that we've been talking about, the third we've been talking about, and how that breaks down like per property. And then you'll be able to see, we can line item each one of those properties and show you exactly how much is going to go to those purposes.
And if you could send us this deck, that'd be great too.
Yes.
The more information we have, the more empowered we are to get the word out.
Absolutely. This is the deck that we used in our second community meeting. And it was the most up to date, I think.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, well, so one of the things I wanted to say was originally there was a line that we felt like we weren't going to be able to remove. That kind of started the conversation about where would these parks be. But now we're actually, there's a high probability that that's not going to be an issue anymore. But we still like the way that turned out with those linear parks. So like where you see the promenade that we're talking about, well, that's South 2nd Street right now, right? If the city were to abandon it, I'm making some assumptions here, but if the city were to abandon it, under normal circumstances, that would revert back to the adjoining property owners, right? And they are, in fact, you are, in fact, abandoning it as a street eventually. It'll come in front of you. So is that land that we would develop or we wouldn't develop? There's an answer where in time you ask me that, yeah. Right? And then there's this whole process that still has to play itself out. But even though we now realize we don't have to leave that there, we're fully committed to it. We still think that is a really great idea for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier.
So you're giving me more questions to ask, but I'm only going to stick with what I got.
Okay.
Question kind of going back to cars. We talked about parking earlier. I guess if your desire is to have fewer cars, would you be open to an amendment that restricts the number of parking spaces, both surface and vertical?
So this kind of gets back to the hotel question as well. We have a market that we have to respond to. And I don't know how aware the council is about the difficulty of getting things financed right now, large projects, but it is. It's incredibly difficult right now.
I'm aware.
Okay, so.
I've got something in my district that with 750 units, my folks want developed and I can't get it done.
That's right. It's material costs, it's interest rates.
Materials label, material, labor, cost of
governments-
capital.
Yeah, different other governmental agencies haven't helped much that have led to a lot of this, right? And so I would hesitate greatly to do those things because we need to be able to be responsive to the market. Look, you don't pay, over $250 million for land to do surface parking. We can't charge enough for parking for that to happen. If we're using surface parking, we're losing. That is a very bad scenario for us. But we've got to get from here to there. And unlike Fallon and others, we actually have payments that we have to make monthly. We have to pay for this land. And as we get into the infrastructure, we're going to have to pay for that infrastructure. And we're going to have to pay, we have been paying every month. And so we need that flexibility. And we need the market. That's one of the things I loved about downtown not having required parking is developers don't want to build parking. It's expensive, but you need to be able to satisfy the lenders, usually are the ones who end up telling you have to build the parking or they're not going to give you the money. And so for that reason, I would hesitate to limit the amount of parking.
And this may be more the last question I have. Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. The last question I have, and I'll do more research on it, is that IDD that you talked about the state having. To me, that sounds like a great way for the owner to get that infrastructure paid for while using the city's credit, right? The city-backed bond for the revenue bonds, right? But I guess my question would be, how do we guarantee payment? And I need to do research on the IDD. I've just heard about it when you were talking, so I'm not necessarily looking, but I'd be curious, how do we guarantee the, repayment of those bonds that we back, especially if no buildings are built yet? So, the owner's on the hook for that, but without the revenue from the structures, from the tenants or the sales of the property in order to pay for that. So how does the city know that those bonds are going to get paid? And that's, again, going maybe down a rabbit hole today, I'm not sure, but
luckily I've got Margaret Darby right here.
Oh, she nodded her head at me like she doesn't want, like she's still in charge here.
And what we would love, and I mean this completely outside of all of this, is an opportunity. Rick Rosenberg, who has worked on these sort of IDDs in North Carolina and Florida and Texas. I'm afraid to say California, but he has, just because I don't want the folks over the state to hear me say that. He's worked on these all over the country, and none have ever failed. And I will tell you, look at the bond market. The bond market loves these because they've never failed.
I think the question is, if the taxpayers are backing the bond, how are they? And I hear that they're not. I see that there's head shaking in the back. So that answers that question. I guess one last question, I'm sorry, Chair, this truly is my last question, is I just want to make sure that everything that the public, you mentioned one time weeks ago, a bridge over the promenade.
Yes.
That sounds really cool. Is that in the bill? And so the question that I have is, what's in the bill that's going to protect the people who are, who I'm talking to and saying, they're going to build a bridge over a promenade. It sounds really cool, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, but what if it doesn't happen because it's not in the legislation, right? And I know it's your intent to do it, but if it's not the law, then whoever in the future, 50 years from now when the last building gets built, right?
Right.
How do we know that they're going to do that?
Right. And
is it in the bill?
Right now, what you have is you have the pedestrian path intersecting with a road. That's all you can see here. And our plans, the amendment to the DTC doesn't specify that any further than that. The major and collector street plan can. The major and collector street plan could say that those are required to be at different elevations, right?
So we could do that and then do this. We could do the MCSP for this sub-district before deciding about this in order to get that answer for the public.
Well, that would be the first time that the MCSP has predated the zoning.
I'm just curious. Yeah, I mean, this is, I'm
it-
wrapping my head around it, Doug.
Yes,
So.
you know,
I'm going to give that to the planning table, actually, if you don't mind.
that'd be great.
So, talking about timing as it relates to the sub-district and the MCSP, the order of operations should be the sub-district first and then the MCSP, because the MCSP needs to react to entitlements. Otherwise, you're creating standards for entitlements that are industrial
We end up
right
with
now.
Hart Lane.
Right, and so so the order of operations is correct. The sub-district should happen first before the MCSP.
Got it. One last question. How big are these blocks? So like between 2nd and East Bank Boulevard, is it like the length of a New York Avenue block or New York Street block, larger than that? I'm thinking about on this pedestrian side, how long is it going to take somebody to walk one of these blocks?
No, these are sort of standard urban block lengths. We have maximum block lengths, maximum building facades, all of that built in. So generally, I think around 300 to 400 feet.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Sorry. I think I'm done.
Thank you, Councilmember. Can y'all think of like a similar block that's 300 to 400 feet, or is that just what's like sort of standard downtown? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, that's pretty standard. Let me look and I will tell you a block if you can give me a minute.
Yeah, I would just be curious. Doesn't have to be right now, but all right. Councilmember Cap, did you have any questions?
Yes, just a couple. Thank you. So first, you mentioned raising the site with a lot of dirt. So I'm curious how much, and I guess relatedly, were you then contemplating that if you look at the far side of the interstate, for example, Davidson and Crutcher, you're talking about having to like ramp up those roads to reach the height of the new scrapyard site? In other words, there'll be some sort of incline there to get up to the new level?
No, first of all, the exact elevation, we're still waiting to hear from the Corps. I think ultimately we'll make that decision. But no, this is a very low-lying area. This is unusually low for the East Bank. And so, no, we're trying to bring it up. And I don't even want to guess at the elevation because I'll be wrong. But the area to the south is elevated above this. I think there's maybe, I'm just trying to remember the topo maps in my head right now. I think there's maybe an area down to the south as you go towards Shelby where it drops a little bit, but most of all of that is elevated above this section. And I think that there's a central area. If you look at Metro's own property, the IDA area, there's an area that sits in the middle of that one that sits as low as we do. And that's where the park is going to be. And I think in great reason for that, right, is that, hey, that's where the low-lying area is. So we're just lower than most of the other areas, and that's why it's going to require us to do that.
And is that raising a TDEC requirement that you anticipate having to meet, or is that just something that you want to do?
No, that's a requirement that and it's not just that it's a requirement that we're being told you need to elevate it to get above that. But if we start to solicit federal funds, they're not going to let us use federal funds below the floodplain. And when we go through that process, we're going to need to be, all this is going to need to be above the floodplain.
It
makes me nervous that Lisa's very active over there. I may have said something wrong.
No, nothing to do with
Okay.
that.
I'll follow up on that in 1 second, but I guess, I appreciate, the utility of that. I guess my question is, you're talking a matter of feet, right?
If I can.
Sure.
Brad Sladen's here. He's the one I should have deferred to.
I'm getting anxious back here with Doug answering all these TDEC questions. So a lot of this is in great coordination with East Bank Development Authority. They obviously have great control over this. Central Waterfront is elevating all of Metro and land up to BFE +1, working with the Corps. Enjoyed getting to work with Tom Palco and the staff. He's hand in hand with the Corps. A lot of this is indeed coming up at a TDEC requirement, at an East Bank development requirement, at a Corps requirement for anything on the East Bank to try to push these things back up to be base flood elevation +1 foot. So a lot of the infrastructure and lots will be elevated accordingly.
And you're anticipating that's going to happen beneath the street grid as well. I mean, all those
The streets
are going to be
come
elevated
up with parcels.
And
Yes.
so, say you're heading toward this site on Davidson, from the park. It may dip a little bit when you go under the interstate, but we're talking about it may be inclining slightly from current elevations on the other side of the
There's
interstate.
certainly going to be some topography, some ramps, and to get back down to existing infrastructure, to tie back into the new stuff. Yeah, no doubt.
Okay,
Of
thank you.
significance, no. It'll be gradual, hardly noticeable, certainly bikeable. We'll make sure it's a good community.
Well, that's part of my question. But yeah, I also just want to get a sense of the scale of what you all have in mind. And then, this...
It's about 2 to 3 feet. It's
Okay.
4 to 5 feet in maybe max areas where Doug was describing a little bit lower. It's not some huge number. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I was looking for like a ballpark of what y'all have in mind. And it relates kind of to my second question, which is you're proposing this sort of viaduct on the East Bank Boulevard at where it currently crosses, what's currently Second, which would be the proposed esplanade. There is not a reason based in the topography why that would need to happen, right? So I guess my question is, what's the rationale? I mean, I see it's eliminating one conflict point, but there's tons of conflict points. This is merely one of them, and I'm not so sure, without a design background, of course, but that the esplanade wouldn't be more pleasant if there wasn't sort of a big shadowy viaduct over and ahead of you.
And you may have noticed, I was very careful about saying that we want to separate the two, right? And right now, the idea is, so we start out at the elevation of where KVB is. And KVB is significantly higher than the rest of the area. And so that's where you begin, and you just carry that elevation over, and then you start to bring it down. So that's why we started with the idea that we would keep it elevated and then bring it down after it crossed over the promenade. But this isn't just any space. This is where we believe the majority of our pedestrians will be walking through our district. And that's a boulevard that's at its widest right at that point. And so it is not just any place. That is a major issue between pedestrians and traffic at that location. And that was the driving reason to separate the two in elevation. And it may be that the right answer is elevate the promenade and have the road go below it. That may be where we end up. But what we're committed to is making sure that they don't interact. That's the purpose of it, is to take that conflict point out. Whether it's leave the promenade above and have the road drop or the inverse.
That intersection currently is at grade though, right? I mean, you would have to build it up in order to build a viaduct up above the promenade.
There's not an intersection of East Bank Boulevard and Second Avenue today.
No, but where it's Second and KVB. I mean, if you're looking at the far side of KVB and KVB, that's at grade, right?
Where the Titans are building Second Avenue and Fallon's going to do the affordable housing, that's certainly at grade there.
Yes, that's what I mean. So you'd have to essentially go up with your viaduct.
So East Bank Boulevard, Second Avenue is the one on the top. East Bank Boulevard is the second one down.
Yes.
So we would come over the top of Second Avenue while Second Avenue stays below. Existing Second tying to current Second or proposed Second there.
Yes, but that's pretty close to grade, I think is what I'm saying currently.
Which intersection are you describing here?
The hypothetical East Bank Boulevard is pretty close to grade now, where KVB is.
No, I'm with you. No, it's about 12, 15 feet there. You're elevated at that spot. Where, because, oh, good, I'm with you now. On the planned north side, the plans for East Bank Boulevard have to ramp up. So through the initial development area that Fallon's working on, East Bank Boulevard, around the existing stadium-ish area and Victory Avenue, it will ramp up to get up to KVB. And this takes that same elevated and then goes up above and comes before it comes back down to get over it.
Okay.
So we are already elevated that intersection, sorry. It eventually comes, sure. Yes, we'll go.
But the current traffic light is at this proposed Second Street.
It's the top.
The
top
current
intersection.
Second Street.
Correct. Yeah, the one does not exist yet at East Bank Boulevard.
And that, okay, so that's 15 feet above.
Yeah.
Grade.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yes, sir.
Okay. Well, I can at least kind of visualize that. Now
On the other side, it ramps up.
okay.
If you would just speak into the microphone if you're going to speak.
I was just saying that, from the on-ramp all the way up to where the bridge goes over the river, it's continuously rising in elevation, the KVB is. And so once you get this far towards the bridge, it's about 15 feet above. And on the north side, the boulevard ramps up fairly quickly to that greater elevation. And that's one of the things that kind of led us to think, well, rather than dropping it down real quickly, what if we just held it there until we got past this pedestrian environment and then brought it down? And wouldn't that be better?
So I appreciate that. Thank you. And I guess, the idea that those two transportation ways won't conflict is not yet reflected in the public realm framework, but you anticipate supporting that to be in the public realm framework.
We're saying it right now. We absolutely are going to make sure that those two networks are separated.
Okay, so one final question, and this is, you mentioned seeking federal funding. I guess my question is what entities would be seeking federal funding and what kind of federal funding?
Well, and so that's, funding's after, all right, and this is what we have now. What can we build and what's it going to cost to build? And we don't have those estimates yet. We don't know what it's going to, because we don't have a major and collector street plan. We don't have the public realm yet. And so once we have those documents, then we'll have someone give us an estimate, and then we'll be able to see, okay, what's our shortfall look like? We'll go through, is it Cumberland region tomorrow? We'll talk with Michael Skipper about what kind of federal grants are out there, what kind of federal assistance out there, what exists in the state to help us get all this infrastructure built, right? And then, what's our capacity for the IDD? You can only burden the property so much and them still be marketable. But what is that capacity? And the bonds are only going to let you, to your point, Council A, the bonds are only going to let, the bond issuers are only going to let you burden those properties so much, right? Because they want to make sure they're going to get paid. So all of that, what are the organizations within the federal government? We can't know that until we know what we need. But we will be working through Michael Skipper and his organization to understand that better.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all I have for the moment, Chair.
All right, thank y'all. I think that is it. There's nobody left to ask questions, and with that, we are adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network.